like I said, it's a lot of moving parts that you really got to orchestrate.
Nathan Martel is the water treatment plant operator on the Moosomin First Nation, 175 kilometers from Saskatoon. He also works as wastewater treatment plant supervisor for the city of North Battleford. He's been doing both jobs for the past 15 years. The community's water plant was built in 2014 to replace their original plant built in the 50s or 60s.
Oh, we had bad water quality. The old plant was very old. Every week we were pretty much patching, getting things to work into the next week. Our chemical feed was so high because our water quality was so poor that we were spending way above average of what we should have been spending for chemical feed. And the water quality, it was horrible. And that affected the whole reserve with the plumbing and everything else.
Journalism students working with a consortium of universities and media outlets led by Concordia University's Institute for Investigative Journalism conducted a survey of water plant operators, managers, and public works employees from 122 First Nations across Canada in 2020. It found that 2/3 of water operators on First Nations were earning lower than the median wage of operators in their province, sometimes close to minimum wage, while often on call 24/7. That's in part because even though the federal government has known for years that First Nations are underfunded for the operation and maintenance of on-reserve water and wastewater systems, Indigenous Services Canada hasn't updated its funding formulas since 1998. After Justin Trudeau's Liberals took power in 2015, the federal government promised it would end all long-term boil water advisories in First Nation communities, those lasting longer than a year, by March 2021. The government has since acknowledged that that timeline will not be met. Since 2015, the government has invested more than $1.74 billion of targeted funds in water and wastewater projects on reserves. However, most of that funding was intended for new construction and major upgrades, not operations and maintenance. O&M costs include the salaries of the water operators and public works personnel who work in water treatment plants and distribution systems, as well as the cost of replacement parts, supplies, chemicals used to treat water, electricity, and inspections. Mark Miller, Minister of Indigenous Services, says he realizes that First Nations are underfunded and water operators are underpaid.
Why should they get paid less than someone working off reserve, quote, I guess off reserve, quote unquote? And that's the reality of working in what is a state-of-the-art system operated by highly trained individuals that do take, it does take some time to train people up.
The consequences of insufficient funding extends beyond operators' salaries. In a 2018 presentation obtained by the consortium, ISC officials suggested that underfunding of O&M contributes to infrastructure failing prematurely. An annual report from 2018 noted that only 77% of inspected water and wastewater systems on reserve were projected to remain operational for their life cycles. Nearly 23% of respondents to the consortium's survey said they don't have enough funding to run their water treatment plants and distribution systems. Another 11% expressed other funding-related concerns, like that it takes too long to get funding for emergency repairs. The Saskatchewan First Nations Water Association did a survey of Saskatchewan water treatment plant operators in 2019, and salaries range from $20,000 to $60,000 annually. In its statement, ISC said that while responsibility for safe drinking water on reserves is shared between First Nation communities and the federal government, First Nations are the owner of their water and wastewater systems and responsible for their daily operation and management. The chief of Moosomin, Bradley Swiftwolf, says water operators like Martel are the livelihood of their community.
We're very fortunate to have Nathan and Ed because they really don't get paid according to everybody else. I'd say on a national scale, they're kind of doing it as a favor to their community, right?
Swiftwolf adds, without men like Martel sacrificing time and wages, they wouldn't be able to afford 3 water operators in Moosomin. He says the government doesn't give them enough to cover wages.
They have their own formula, right, that they utilize. And yeah, for Moosomin it's 40,000 based on the water treatment plant that we have.
That formula is outdated, according to experts and the government itself. But despite over 3 years of negotiations, there is still no official policy change to address this shortfall. Chief Swiftwolf thinks ISC should offer more money for water plant operators to keep them working on reserve. Last December, Minister Miller announced that the government will provide another $616.3 million over 6 years for operations and maintenance at on-reserve water and wastewater plants. In a statement, his department said the new funding will help First Nations retain qualified water operators.
A lot of times we're dependent on federal funding, and if you don't, we haven't really seen an increase. We did see a small increase because of the change in the facility, but it's just not enough.
The band struggles to even pay the $1,000 every 2 weeks that Martel and his colleagues receive. He says the community is lucky that they have been able to retain these employees. Priscilla Wolf, APTN National News, Moosomin First Nation.